Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again, back with more Just Know HOA stories. In today's video, an evil HOA tries to steal over 2,000 acres of farmland from a farmer, but he gets epic revenge. Let's dive right into the story. One of the greatest identifiers of our family is the 2,000-acre ancestral farmland that gets passed down from generation to generation. Usually, the property gets passed down to the oldest child, which has happened since the 1900s. When my father passed away, it was my turn to inherit the farm and all the practices that came with it. There were plenty of trees that had to be harvested seasonally and farm animals that had to be catered to and fed properly. As long as I can remember, we had a few cows, pigs, chickens, and even a goat. So with this farm, my dad was able to start his own dairy. So while I was off to a great college to study economics, my dad did everything himself. From feeding and milking the cows to making butter in the evening with one hand and making milkshakes with the other. My dad had been a dairy farmer for more than 3 decades and is more than half of the reason why the property is worth so much. When he passed away, even the cows seemed sad. However, it was my mother who mourned him the most. I moved in with her into the huge mansion that was also part of the farm when I inherited it. She always told me the biggest mistake my father made was selling 50 acres of the property to a businessman who was acquiring as much property as he could to build a bunch of small houses and then created a gated community. He had used the money he got from selling a small part of the land to kickstart the dairy business. I did not understand why my mother thought it was such a bad idea, considering the fact that our dairy farming boomed after this, but soon I found out exactly what she meant by this. So, the following year, that businessman completed his construction and formed a homeowners association for the large number of similar-looking houses he had built and then sold to various people. The HOA was filled with incredibly greedy people who made up a set of bizarre rules just to extract fines from the residents whenever they did not abide by the rules. Most residents were unaware of the rules and many became the victims of constant fines they could not afford to pay because they were just barely surviving from the previous year. While the HOA's rules and the greedy leadership were all designed to line their pockets, residents never understood, but instead the HOA was raking in $30,000 a month. All residents who tried to fight the rules and leadership were ignored and even had their HOA fines increased. It was hard enough to turn a blind eye to this, but it got much harder when the HOA sent me a fine notice too. At first I assumed they had sent it accidentally, but when I opened it, the notice claimed that farm animals were not allowed in this area. I was baffled. My property was not even part of the HOA and they had no right to impose their rules on me. The farm has been here far longer than they have, so there was no way they could be claiming that my animals were illegal. Anyway, the following day, I meant to send the letter back to where it came from, but I was surprised to find that my letterbox was filled with notices. The HOA was trying to slap various fines on me, and each fine's amount got higher than the previous one. Their accusations ranged from badly maintained lawns to the wrong house color to ill treatment of pets. Just when I was starting to think that someone had to remind them that I'm not part of their association, I found the most ridiculous accusation so far. They wanted me to pay an insane amount for not signing the agreement to come under the jurisdiction of the HOA. It turns out they did in fact know that I am not part of the HOA, but they just decided to pretend that I am. If they were going to make decisions on their own without even informing me, I figured I could just do the same. I tossed all the notices in the trash and went about my day. I was not part of their extremely useless association, and I was not about to let them bother me about it. The following week was relatively normal and I did not hear anything from the HOA. My mother was still pretty worried that they would do something else to coerce me into signing up with them, but I was not too concerned. I thought to myself that there's not much they can do apart from sending me mails that I just end up ignoring. Turns out I was wrong and there was a lot more they were willing to do just to get me to bend to their will. We started finding poisoned dog treats on our property. I'm assuming they were thrown there by the HOA because they thought our dog would eat them and get sick, but sheep dogs are known for being smart. There's no way our dog would eat rotten meat laying around on the floor. Things got concerning when the meat that was thrown looked perfectly normal to our eyes, but the dogs still avoided them. I knew immediately that it must have been poisoned. If they had ended up ingesting it, it might have been the last meal they had and we would have had no evidence to at least get justice. It terrified me that if they tried doing the same thing with any other animal's food, the animal might have actually eaten it. Our farm ran primarily due to the animals, and more importantly, they were all part of our family now, and losing any of them would be absolutely devastating. I knew I had to counter this. We've never had to care much about security because this has been a safe neighborhood for so many years. My mother was really sad this had changed, but it was about time I started to actually lock up our gates. Children would usually come to the farm to see the animals and play with them, but all of this now had to stop. I was hoping the harassment from the HOA would cease soon so things could go back to the way they used to be. Once I started locking up the gates, the mysterious dog treats stopped showing up. Just when I started to let my guard down, my wife rushed into the living room to tell me one of our cows was choking. I ran out to the place where they usually graze. The entire place was littered with tiny plastic wrappers. With great difficulty, I managed to save the cow that was choking on one of the wrappers and took her to the vet just to ensure that she was okay. Meanwhile, my wife and mother had to immediately send the cows back to their shed and clear the grass of all the wrappers. While leaving for the vet, I noticed that the lock on the main gate had been tampered with. Someone had deliberately littered the pastures with the intention of hurting my cows. If their motive was to only litter the place, they wouldn't have gone to the trouble of finding only small plastic wrappers that the cows would not be able to avoid. I was furious. These cows and the dairy farm were my father's legacy. I couldn't just let somebody destroy it out of greed. My wife told me I should go to the police, but we had no proof about who actually did this. My mother was convinced it was the HOA, and I had a hunch that she was right. When I was trying to plan out my next course of action, I heard the doorbell. I gritted my teeth when I saw the secretary of the HOA at the door. He did not even try to hide the fact that he was here to threaten my farm. He told me that the fines have added up to half the value of the property, so I should just give that to the HOA as compensation. He added that plastic wrappers will be the least of my concerns if I don't agree by the next week, and left. I stood by the door speechless as I watched him walk away. I could not believe that I said nothing despite the boiling rage inside of me. My wife and mother convinced me that the best course of action now was to go to the police. I knew I had no other option at the moment, so I agreed. The farm has been here for over a century, so I assumed the cops would take me seriously when I informed them of what had happened. I was shocked when they did absolutely nothing. They did not even bother taking it down as a complaint and just asked me to stop wasting their time over cows and plastic. The cows were so much more than just animals on the farm to me. I tried explaining that to them, but I was just asked to leave. On the way back, I received a text that said, "Don't bother going to the cops, they are mine too." I kicked myself. Of course, the association paid the cops. There was no way they would have the audacity to break into people's houses and vandalize their property if they did not pay off the police. I realized the only way to fight this was legally, even though that meant it would be a huge process. The only way to speed up that process was to find undeniable proof of their crimes. I decided to increase the protection of my house by getting a different gate installed along with a few security cameras across the property. The renovation of the gate was pretty hard to hide, and I knew the HOA would pick on us during the construction process, but this acted as a cover to install the cameras without their knowledge. While they were focused on sending me fines for the heavy machinery that had come in to complete the gate, I got the cameras installed behind their backs. All the machinery to build the gate and renovate the walls to accommodate the new gate were parked inside my property, but according to the HOA, that was their property now. They sent the cops to come and threaten me about the illegal construction. Just when they thought they had the upper hand, I pulled out the signed permission granted by the state to construct the new gate. My wife had friends who held important posts in the mayor's office, as well as ones who were well-known advocates. Even if she didn't have these connections, it has always been easy to get permission for anything that helps with farming. It was still a dairy farm, and increasing security for the cows sounded like a valid reason for them to give me the required documents to construct. The cops could not say anything when they saw the document and were forced to leave. This infuriated the HOA, and the very next day they decided to vandalize the renovated wall and paint it in the ugliest shade of mustard. They spray painted ugly cows with bright red paint and then had the audacity to send another fine notice for vandalizing the neighborhood. The cameras had caught all of this, but the problem was that only a few of the members of the HOA were present. My wife told me that this might not be enough to get all of them, and that was the goal. Unless we managed to get the entire HOA board disbanded, it was not enough. We were not about to let them try and murder one of my cows and just get away with it. We decided to work on a backup plan and find dirt on the members of the HOA. There was clear evidence of blackmail, and multiple people who were conned into being part of the HOA were willing to testify. Just to be sure, we decided to hire private detectives to find more information on the association. Just when I was getting confident that we could win against them, the secretary decided to pay us another visit. The gate was still in its last stages of completion, so he managed to barge in. My mother told me to stay in the house and not engage him, but he grabbed our baby goat and demanded that I step out. I figured there was not much he could do since he came alone and went boldly, so I went out to confront him. He let go of the goat and shoved a document and a pen into my hands. When I glanced at it and saw that it was to transfer the property over to him, I almost laughed out loud. Before I could tell him off, he grabbed me from behind and I felt something cold press against my neck. I froze when I realized that he was holding a knife against my neck to force me to sign the document. I knew the secretary was crazy, but I didn't think that he would go this far. If I signed the document, I would lose everything, but I could no longer tell if he was bluffing about cutting me. So, luckily, I did not have to make that decision. When he was distracted by me, my mother had gotten my father's old rifle and pressed the barrel to the back of his head. Before he could process what was happening, I used this development to escape his grip. I tore the document up in front of him and asked him to leave the property immediately while the gun was still pointed at him. With great frustration, the man stormed out. We laughed about the whole situation later, as he was fully unaware of the fact that the gun did not work anymore. My mother kept the relic in remembrance of my late father, but it could no longer do any damage to anyone or anything. It almost felt like my parents still protected the farm together even after my father's passing. The most important thing was that we now had footage of the head of the HOA threatening me, along with all the evidence of tax evasion and forgery that the private detectives had acquired. All that was left was to take them to court. We spoke to the police officers that they had bribed and came to an agreement. Once they knew that the HOA was definitely gonna be in trouble, they knew that even they would be in hot water if it got out that the cops took a bribe. The police agreed to change their narrative and say that the HOA tried to bribe the cops. With the police on our side, most of the members were arrested. After the court proceedings, more than half of them were sentenced to jail and the association was unconditionally disbanded. And yeah, ripe stars, these entitled HOA Karens finally got the painful realization that you should never mess with a farmer, because if you do, something like this will happen. So if you wanna be an HOA president and harass people, just don't do it near a farmer. Because more often than not, the farmer will kick your butt. Anyway, if you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like the video and also post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. Thank you so much. The next one is a story from r/ripe stories and it is titled The Return of Hugh Janus. Posted by user Doggy Taco. A while back I posted a story of a time I gave a scammer a huge dose of karma, which was when I worked at a restaurant called 5 Dudes. In the post I explained only one of the scams these guys would try. It was a story that went down in that store's legend, but as fate would have it, it would not be the last. Yesterday I was shopping around for an anniversary gift for my wife. My brother-in-law is in the military and I asked him to do me a favor and take me on base so we could look around the NEX, the Naval Exchange, and see if I could get a better deal. And well, after some looking around we didn't find what I was looking for, but I decided since he did me a solid by bringing me, I was gonna at least buy the man some food. So we stopped by the food court and he decided on 5 Dudes. I didn't expect to see anyone I knew since it was so long ago, but lo and behold, I see a similar face. He was a simple red shirt, yes that's a Star Trek reference, but we actually called them that back when I was a manager. Red shirts are basically the ones at the bottom of the totem pole. It would seem that he decided to stick around and had now become a shift manager like I was back in the day. We recognized each other immediately and got to talking. The store was slow, so we had a good long conversation. He even took his lunch with us and he hooked us up with some free fries and shakes. Eventually the phone rings and I see one of the red shirts pick up and give the normal greeting. She looks a bit confused and comes up to our table with the phone. Red shirt, hey boss, some guy's on the phone but I don't speak Spanish. He said something about gift cards. The second she says this, my buddy and I lock eyes and an evil grin that would rival the Grinch creeps onto my face. He looks at me, smiles, and without saying a word hands me the phone. Now, before I go over the details of the call, I already know what you're gonna say. Really? What are the odds this would happen the day you just happen to be there? To those people I say, just how many spam calls do you get per day? If you said 0, you're a liar. Obviously, this is not some grand criminal network trying the same scams over and over. It is just some desperate people who would probably sell out their grandma for some spare cash. The name of the game with these scammers is repetition. No matter how dumb the scam is, just keep trying until it works. Probably the most infamous scam, at least when I worked at 5 Dudes, was the gift card scam. So basically, someone calls up a store and tells them they are delivering a fresh batch of gift cards and to meet them outside ASAP with payment since they have another delivery to make. I know what you're thinking, who the hell would fall for that? Well, unfortunately, such is the nature of scam calls. They don't care how many times they have to try it, eventually someone will fall for it. It was common to call the district manager as soon as you received a call like this, so they could warn other stores since they would try to canvass as many stores as possible in a single day. Basically, the sooner you call to warn everybody, the better chance you had to protect your store. At least that was the theory. Without fail, you would hear of at least one store every month or so falling for this scam. My buddy calls the district manager while I keep the guy busy. Me, hello, this is 5 Dudes, how can I help you? Scammer, hola compa, ¿hablas español? Me now in Spanish, of course, how can I help? Scammer, hey listen, I have an order for $200 worth of gift cards out here. Anyway, you can come pick them up, right? I'm in a hurry. Me, oh? $200? Well, I guess just meet me in the parking lot and I will bring out the cash. Scammer, are you sure? There's a gate out here. Will they let me in? Of course they will. Just tell them that you're here to speak with the manager. Scammer, okay, what's his name? It is at this point that my mind went through an entire encyclopedia of Simpsons episodes. So many choices, but what to pick? Amanda Hump, Harry Johnson, Dang Lin Wang, Luke at my ass. So many choices, but at that moment I figured why not bust out an old legend for one last ride. Me, my first name, Huge. Last name, Janus. He is a gringo. Scammer, huge anus. Okay, thanks. He then hangs up the phone. I raise my hands in triumph and at this point I see most of the red shirts have gathered by the registers and have been listening in. Everyone bursts into confused laughter, not really understanding what just happened, so my buddy explains the legend that is huge anus. We all had a laugh for a bit and about a minute later, the phone rings again. My buddy, now beaming with excitement, answers it. Buddy, 5 Dudes, how can I help you? Guard, I have someone at the gate claiming you gave him permission to enter the base for some reason. And you know that's not allowed. I cannot just let someone on a military base just because you said it was okay. Buddy, oh, I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about. Who did he say he was here to meet? Guard, one moment. Oh, is your name Huge? Buddy, no, my name is Buddy. Why? Guard, are you the manager? Buddy, yes I am. I'm sorry but I'm confused. What's going on? Guard, no need to worry. The issue is being resolved. Have a good day. With that ominous statement, we immediately ran outside the food court where we had a somewhat clear view of MP vehicles swarming some poor Toyota Corolla and a very confused man in handcuffs. In case you're wondering, attempting to sneak onto a military base is a rather big no-no. I'm not sure if it's worthy of jail time, but I know you can get yourself a decent fine somewhere around 500 bucks. My buddy then calls all the red shirts back inside and me and my brother-in-law finished our food. If you are wondering why such an aggressive response for something seemingly small, well, aside from it being standard procedure to detain someone in this case, some MPs don't have much to do, so when they get the chance to act, boy do they get excited. At least that is how it was at this particular base. In any case, another scammer gets what he deserves and I can only hope that he learned a valuable lesson. Never mess with a huge Janus. And the next one is a little saga about a couple of awful entitled neighbors from hell. I live with my parents in the UK in Yorkshire and we don't exactly live in the quietest of places. There is always a garden and house party happening somewhere or a screaming match happening in the street. That is entertainment sometimes, so we will let that slide. However, for the past 5 years our next door neighbors have been an absolute nightmare. When they first moved in, it was a couple and their 4 children, ranging from ages 11 to newborn, and the noise started more or less straight away. But we did not say anything, as we knew it must have been difficult to move houses with 4 young children, so we made friendly interactions. They are pleasant enough to talk to, and we have not had any crossed words. But it has now been 5 years and around a dozen different complaints to the local council, who won't do anything because that would actually require them to work. People's patience is obviously a little short now with quarantine and the country being on lockdown, but there are some days where it is just too much. It starts with little things like putting their dog in the front garden at 7 AM and letting him bark and howl, and they just blatantly ignore him for hours on end. They will have their TV at an unnecessary volume and then they will play music over that. To the point that where you can feel the vibrations on the other side of the house, and then they will try to have a conversation over the top of that. There was a spell where they had endless parties, including an all-night party for their 1-year-old that started at 5 PM and was finally stopped by the police at 4 AM. Bear in mind that the 1-year-old whose birthday it was crying upstairs all night and no one checked on her. When it was first announced that the country was going onto lockdown, my dad and I were notified that we were required to work from home. He works for the government, so his work is extremely important, and I work for a large theater company, all of whose theaters closed without notice, leaving thousands upon thousands of tickets to be refunded and rescheduled. As well as this, I was studying to complete my master degree and had 3 exams, a 25,000 word thesis and a couple of essays to complete from home with no support to resources, as well as working my job too. Also, I'm the only person in my house who was not on the vulnerable list for the virus. Between the two of them, my parents have diabetes, autoimmune issues, motor neuron problems, and are on a number of controlled drugs, some of which were fatally affected by the virus. This meant that I was responsible for getting the necessary shopping for my household, my elderly grandparents, and my vulnerable and newly pregnant sibling. So it goes without saying that I was all of a sudden incredibly stressed and overwhelmed. We had spoken to the neighbors just after the lockdown announcement and told them that we obviously don't mind them playing music or watching TV, but if they could just keep it at a reasonable level during the day. Both of our work hours were 8 AM until 5 PM, and the wife was very pleasant and promised that she would make sure they kept it down, and even said that her kids were not allowed outside the front gate out of fear of the virus. This lasted for about 2 weeks, and just when we thought this lockdown period would be okay, things just went back to how they were before. It's worse at night because their 4-year-old daughter just dominates the house, charging around the house all hours of the night. No exaggeration, but sometimes it sounds like a herd of elephants charging around. She will scream and cry and shout for hours, and there does not seem to be anyone trying to tell her to stop or calm her down if she's upset. The 3 boys will be playing on their consoles all night, and their TV must be fitted to their wall, which I just so happen to share, and all you can hear is the game audio and then their screaming and shouting. The music has slowly started to creep back on, getting earlier and earlier every day, and now it is at a point where the music will turn to at 11 AM, and we have to repeatedly knock and ask them to turn it down, which they will for about an hour, and then it will slowly increase in volume again. I have lost count of the number of times I've had to terminate a phone call with a customer because I cannot actually hear what they are saying. I've been in the middle of Zoom meetings with my managers, and they have had to ask me if I can move to a different room because they can hear the music, and on one occasion my webcam was actually vibrating along with the music. They constantly break the lockdown restrictions and go and visit their family and leave the house for half the day, while leaving their music on loud, and the oldest son will have his girlfriend, her toddler son, and his 3 or 4 other friends over at night, and they'll be going in and out of other people's houses without much care. The most annoying thing about that is that his girlfriend is a nurse at the local A&E, so she is exposed to the virus all day, and they just don't seem to think that could be dangerous to her child or our neighbor's kids. They now have a newborn who was born 2 months prematurely, so has a lot of health complications. There have been times where we have been tempted to play them at their own game and put music on or have the TV loud, but we are not that petty and we don't want to become a bad neighbor for someone else. This post serves more as a rant and vent because clearly talking to the neighbors and the council has proven useless. Also, I recently started my recruitment process to join my county's police force, so obviously this kind of disturbance is not ideal, especially if I'm going to be working 12 or 13-hour shifts day and night. And so I am currently looking to move into my first home by myself, and I'm going to make sure that there aren't any neighbors like them around before I move. There have been times where we've been tempted to play them at their own game and put music on or have the TV loud, but we are not that petty and we don't want to become a bad neighbor for someone else. This post serves more as a rant and vent because clearly talking to the neighbors and the council had proven useless. I have recently started my recruitment process to join my county's police force, so obviously this kind of disturbance is not ideal, especially if I'm going to be working 12/13-hour shifts day and night. And so I am currently looking to move into my first home by myself, and I'm going to make sure that there aren't any neighbors like them around before I move. Update number 1 to the story. Update from my previous post. After finally having enough of not being able to even have a half day's work and the council not doing anything to help us, I decided to have a polite conversation with my neighbor, which basically went like this. Me, I don't have any issues with you playing music or your kids playing outside, but all we ask for is that you keep it at a reasonable level. Some of us are trying to work from home and it's making it hard to get anything done. Neighbor, well, I don't have a job, so I don't need to work from home. Me, but I do. Neighbor, and I don't. Me, just because you don't have to work from home does not mean that others aren't. Neighbor, no, I get that, but I don't have to work from home, so... Me, as the neighbor slowly closes the door in my face, I literally don't know what to say to that. As soon as I set foot back inside my front door, the kids were outside playing football and screaming, and the music went on full blast. We've gotten the community police involved about the lockdown breaches, but they don't seem interested either. Update 2 to the story. This is the third update to my ongoing issues with my inconsiderate neighbors. So yesterday I had an incredibly important job interview. It was my final interview with my local police branch, and if I passed this interview, then the past 6 months of training and tests would have been worth it, and I would be a full-time police officer. My interview was 3 hours long, and I had a time slot for 10 AM to 1 PM. I had deliberately picked this time slot as I thought an earlier one would mean there would be less chance of noise from any of my neighbors. 7:30 AM, next door neighbor's music is on full blast, no warning, so I was already startled from a rude awakening. This came after not being able to get to sleep until 3 AM because the same neighbors were having a party. Less than 4 hours sleep and a 3-hour interview coming up. Safe to say I was not amused, however I thought that I would give them the benefit of the doubt and give them time to turn it down. It got to 9 AM and it was still going, and now the kids were screaming and running around outside, having to shout louder than the music just to be heard. So I sent my neighbor a text just politely asking them to turn the music down, not off, as I had my interview in an hour. It got to 9:30 AM and I had no reply, and the music was steadily getting louder. So I went and knocked on their door, and of course they could not hear me above the music, so I had to knock on their window and more or less felt like I was invading their home. The wife answered, the same woman I texted, and she was oblivious to the fact that I had texted her, and unbelievably, she did not seem to think anything was wrong with the level of music. I asked if she would turn the music down, and she said that she would, but if she could not stop her partner from turning it up again if he wanted to, they were having another party as it was their son's A-level results day and he had done well. I told her that as nice as that was, I had an important interview that I could not rearrange and could not afford to not get. Her response was a shrug, and she said she would turn it down a bit. Thanking her, I went back home and immediately noticed that the music had turned, so I was a bit happier. I sat up in my kitchen and makeshift office and sat down to wait 15 minutes until my interview started. I could still hear the music and the screaming, but it was enough that I could drown it out. The interview was going well until about 10:30. And I think you can guess what happened. Music whacked back up to full volume, even louder than before. All of the neighbors' doors and windows are opened, the kids are screaming louder than ever, and everyone is now standing outside in the garden and talking loudly right by my kitchen window. I tried not to let it get to me, but when I saw one of the guys doing it to interview look confused and distracted, I know that they could hear it too. I immediately apologized and explained what had happened and said that I could move to another room and carry on. So I had to move from a proper office setup to my small and partially decorated dark living room. The interview went ahead, but I could not focus properly, as all I could feel was their music thumping and I was now getting migraine. I had to ask them to repeat questions numerous times and I just could not drown out the music and the screaming. The interview finished at 1 PM and at 1:15 PM it suddenly went silent from next door. The whole family and their friends, there was about 20 people there altogether, left the house at the same time. They 100% did it on purpose, and I just found out this morning that I did not pass the final interview and I have to wait 6 months before I can apply for the police again. And to run more salt into the wound, I have to do all of the tests and interviews that I had already passed all over again. I have appealed the decision and have further explained the circumstances, so hopefully they are lenient. I'm planning on confronting my neighbors today after I have calmed down, so there should be an update on how that goes. Update 3. This is a pretty short but progressive update. I appealed the decision the police made regarding my interview, and that is still in consideration. I also confronted the wife about what happened that day, and she played ignorance. She claimed that she did not realize I had an interview even though I texted her and knocked on her door and spoke to her. She even tried to claim that I was the one playing my music loudly. As someone who gets chronic migraines about twice a day, that is near enough impossible. Also, the council have been in touch and have asked me to keep a diary of every time my neighbors are disruptive or a nuisance. It has been a week and I've already filled one side of the sheet. I'm currently sitting in my car typing this, as I've had to get out of the house for a bit. At 9 this morning, the eldest son set up his DJ decks in the front garden under a cover, as there is a torrential downpour currently, and he started playing music at a reasonable level while working on the garden. A bit strange saying, as it has rained for the past 15 hours, and then at 10:30 about a dozen of his friends came over with multiple crates of beer and a mini barbecue. From then until now, 16:30, they've been blasting their horrendous MC music and drinking heavily. Some of them barely look 16, never mind 18. Last night they had a party for their baby's first birthday, and this consisted of about 20 adults all drinking and shouting in the garden until 2 in the morning while the kids ran outside my house. They climbed over their own fence and into my garden to play tag. Today, my dad has had to take a risk and drive into his office for his important meetings today, as he can't hear anything over the phone. Obviously, during a pandemic and when living with someone who is high risk, as well as having a sister who is 33 weeks pregnant, the last thing he should be doing is going into the office when they have all been told to work from home. I have to continue recording their noises for another week and send it back to the council, and hopefully they will eventually do something about it. I'm hoping that things will be better from next week, as the schools are reopening fully again, so hopefully things might quiet down a bit. Final update, it is now 2022 and I can happily say the awful neighbors finally got evicted. Years of audio and video evidence collected by me and other neighbors finally led to them getting evicted, and everyone in the neighborhood is happy about it. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.